The unraveling. How a late-night host's recklessness triggered an industry quake. There are moments in the churning, often chaotic world of American media when the usual rules simply cease to apply. We've grown accustomed to the predictable dance. A celebrity makes a controversial statement. A brief storm of social media outrage erupts. A carefully worded non-apology is issued. And within days, the cycle resets. The system, robust and self-preserving, typically protects its own, especially when the transgressions align with the prevailing cultural winds of Hollywood. But what happens when that system fundamentally breaks down? What happens when a figure, seemingly untouchable, oversteps so catastrophically that it doesn't just backfire, but pulls the very rug out from under their feet, triggering an industry-wide earthquake? This isn't a story about a joke that simply didn't land. This is a profound narrative about the erosion of trust, the fragility of credibility, and the shocking moment when even the most powerful media networks decide that the cost of protection has become too high. This is the story of how Jimmy Kimmel went too far, and the seismic shift it revealed about the contemporary media landscape. The stage for this dramatic unraveling was set against a backdrop of national mourning. The unexpected and tragic passing of Charlie Kirk, a prominent and influential voice in conservative youth activism, should have been a moment for collective introspection, perhaps even a rare opportunity for unity in grief. Instead, Jimmy Kimmel chose to exploit this tragedy for his late-night monologue. Yet, what unfolded on screen bore no resemblance to traditional comedy. Kimmel, leveraging his platform with millions of loyal viewers, disseminated a narrative that was not just misleading, but demonstrably false. He brazenly insinuated that Kirk's assailant was a member of the MAGA gang, subtly yet perniciously suggesting that conservative circles bore some responsibility for the murder of one of their own leading figures. Consider the sheer audacity of this claim. A young man, allegedly targeted for his political convictions, and Kimmel opted to twist this profound sorrow into a weapon aimed squarely at those who were grieving his loss. The subsequent official investigations, meticulously documented through police reports and court transcripts, painted a starkly different, irrefutable picture. The perpetrator was not, in fact, a right-wing extremist. Instead, compelling evidence, ranging from extensive text messages and incendiary social media posts to meticulously engraved bullets used in the attack, unequivocally identified the killer as a radical leftist whose fervent political motivations were diametrically opposed to everything Kirk represented. This individual's expressed intent was clear: to silence Kirk's influential voice permanently. But Kimmel's egregious miscalculation didn't end there. In what many seasoned observers now consider the most tone-deaf and disrespectful moment of his illustrious career, he proceeded to publicly mock President Donald Trump's genuine expression of sorrow over Kirk's assassination. With a smirk, Kimmel compared the president's public grief to the fleeting sorrow of a 4-year-old mourning a goldfish. The irony was almost unbearable. A sitting president of the United States conveying sincere anguish over the murder of a young American citizen, and Kimmel found it suitable material for cheap, partisan laughter. While I understand the role of comedy in pushing boundaries and challenging conventions, Kimmel's actions that night transcended any recognizable definition of satire or humor. This was not edgy commentary. It was the cynical exploitation of a national tragedy and a family's profound grief, weaponized for transparent political gain against an opposing ideology. This was not comedy. It was a deeply disturbing demonstration of callousness. However, the verbal assault was merely the initial tremor. What followed sent shockwaves that reverberated far beyond the insulated bubble of Hollywood. Historically, a gaffe of this magnitude might have generated a fleeting flurry of angry social media posts before fading into the background. The entertainment industry had perfected a well-worn playbook. Controversial statements would ignite a brief firestorm. Networks would issue meticulously crafted, often meaningless, non-apologies. And within a fortnight, the news cycle would inevitably move on. The established system was engineered to protect its high-profile figures, especially when their controversial pronouncements aligned with Hollywood's dominant progressive leanings. But this time, something fundamentally different occurred. Within hours of Kimmel's monologue airing, Brendan Carr, the outspoken chairman of the Federal Communications Commission, FCC, issued an unprecedented public statement that sent a cold shiver down the spine of the entire entertainment world. It is crucial to grasp the gravity of this intervention. The FCC rarely, if ever, directly intervenes in the content of late-night comedy. Their purview typically involves technical regulations, spectrum management, and the operational minutiae of broadcasting. For the chairman to publicly condemn specific content was an almost unheard-of departure from established protocol. Carr's condemnation was unequivocal. He characterized Kimmel's conduct as some of the sickest behavior possible and strongly indicated that the FCC was actively exploring potential regulatory actions. More significantly, he subtly, yet powerfully, reminded every broadcast network of a critical, often overlooked obligation: their unique mandate to serve the public interest. Unlike cable channels or streaming services, broadcast networks operate on publicly owned airwaves, granting them privileges that come with inherent responsibilities. This was not mere regulatory posturing. When the chairman of the FCC publicly mentions broadcast licenses and public interest obligations, network executives, overseeing multi-billion-dollar enterprises, pay rapt attention. Suddenly, what appeared to be just another late-night scandal was being reframed as a potential breach of public trust, with tangible, existential consequences. The true earthquake, however, originated from an unexpected quarter. The very broadcasters who had faithfully carried Kimmel's show for years began to strategically retreat. Within days, major broadcast groups, collectively reaching tens of millions of American households, issued announcements that would have been unimaginable just months prior. Nexstar Media Group, the largest owner of television stations in the United States, reaching nearly 40% of American homes, declared that it would immediately cease airing Jimmy Kimmel Live on its ABC affiliates. Consider the sheer scale of this decision. In one fell swoop, Kimmel lost access to an astonishing nearly 40% of his potential American television audience. Then, Sinclair Broadcast Group, another colossal player in the broadcast landscape, followed suit with an even more pointed declaration. Rather than simply dropping Kimmel's program, Sinclair announced it would fill that coveted time slot with a special program dedicated to honoring Charlie Kirk's memory and mission. They further publicly demanded that Kimmel make a substantial donation to Kirk's organization, Turning Point USA, as an unequivocal gesture of accountability. Could anyone have envisioned such a dramatic reversal even 5 or 10 years ago? A major broadcasting company not only severing ties with a network show over its political content, but then using that very slot to celebrate the individual the host had callously mocked? It was an unprecedented overturning of the established order. This is where the story truly intensifies, because the network itself, ABC, under the vast umbrella of the Walt Disney Company, didn't just pause, they decisively pulled the plug. It's imperative to understand the internal dynamics at play within Disney during this tumultuous period. Disney, a colossal media conglomerate, is hardly known for its conservative leanings. For years, they had comfortably greenlit a steady stream of anti-Trump content, politically charged comedy leaning heavily left, and entertainment reflecting Hollywood's progressive values. Their decision was not born from a sudden ideological conversion. No, what transpired was far more significant, and profoundly business-driven reports indicated that Disney executives were reportedly incandescent with rage, not over Kimmel's political stance, but due to the devastating business implications of his comments. A highly visible host had transformed a national tragedy into an immense liability for the entire network. Sponsors began to express profound nervousness. Crucially, affiliate stations, the lifeblood of any broadcast network, were openly rebelling. Regulatory agencies, spearheaded by the FCC, were asking pointed, inconvenient questions. All of this chaos was swirling around a show whose ratings, frankly, were already too anemic to justify such a severe public relations headache. The decision to indefinitely suspend Jimmy Kimmel Live came directly from the highest echelons of Disney's corporate structure. This was not the timid maneuvering of a mid-level manager attempting to quell a minor controversy. This was a calculated, strategic business decision, made by individuals who understood with stark clarity that protecting Jimmy Kimmel had simply become too expensive, too risky, and ultimately not worth the escalating corporate cost. The timing of this decisive action was particularly significant, sending a chilling, unambiguous message throughout Hollywood. The rules had fundamentally changed. For decades, the entertainment industry operated under the implicit assumption that political controversy originating from the left was largely a safe harbor. Mocking conservative figures, lampooning traditional values, and launching attacks on Republican politicians were not merely acceptable. Such actions were often met with industry accolades and positive media coverage. However, the Kimmel debacle irrevocably demonstrated that there were now severe, tangible consequences for overstepping. When your comments become so inflammatory that they threaten the business model itself, the protective shield that the entertainment industry had always provided begins to crack and crumble. Yet, this wasn't solely about one egregious remark. It was meticulously interwoven with a larger, systemic decay that had been quietly accelerating for years. To truly grasp the velocity of Jimmy Kimmel's career collapse, one must examine the stark, unflattering numbers that were already working against him. The uncomfortable truth that Disney executives had long attempted to gloss over was that Kimmel's flagship program had been struggling for a considerable period before this controversy even erupted. By late 2024, Kimmel was barely attracting a nightly viewership of approximately 1 million, and that was on a favorable evening. To underscore this stark reality, numerous independent YouTube channels often operated by individuals working from their homes, consistently garnered more daily views than a major broadcast network's late-night flagship program. Concurrently, on Fox News, Greg Gutfeld's burgeoning late-night show was consistently eclipsing Kimmel's audience, drawing in excess of 3 million viewers, more than triple his competitor's reach. This wasn't merely a temporary dip in viewership. The data revealed a steady, precipitous decline spanning several years, with Kimmel shedding audiences at an annual rate of 10 to 15%. For a production costing millions of dollars to produce and sustained by dozens of highly compensated staff, these figures signaled an existential problem far transcending mere political differences. Exacerbating ABC's predicament was the disheartening demographic composition of Kimmel's remaining audience. It was heavily concentrated within older, more affluent liberal segments, demographics that advertisers were increasingly disinvesting from simultaneously. The younger, highly sought-after demographics that advertisers desperately craved were sourcing their comedy and commentary from an entirely different ecosystem: podcasts, streaming platforms, and agile social media creators capable of responding to real-time events, unburdened by the rigid scheduling of traditional television. ABC executives had, for months, been quietly exploring a viable exit strategy, and the Kirk controversy inadvertently provided them with a corporate deus ex machina. When a show is already hemorrhaging financial resources and declining in relevance, and then simultaneously ignites a massive public relations conflagration threatening broader business relationships, the corporate decision becomes uncomfortably straightforward. And this is where the narrative becomes truly compelling. While Kimmel's ratings were in freefall, conservative-leaning alternatives were experiencing a period of unprecedented, explosive growth. Gutfeld's show was not merely outperforming Kimmel, it was demonstrating year-over-year growth rates of 20% to 30%. A phenomenon unheard of while every other late-night program was contracting. The audience for late-night comedy and commentary was demonstrably present, but they were consciously choosing entirely different voices to deliver it. This created a fascinating and disruptive dynamic within the entertainment industry. For many years, Hollywood had operated under the entrenched assumption that conservative content was a niche market with inherently limited appeal. The resounding success of programs like Gutfeld's, juxtaposed with the concurrent decline of traditionally liberal late-night shows, compelled entertainment executives to fundamentally reevaluate their long-held assumptions about the true preferences of the American viewing public. So, if the ratings were already in decline, why did this specific inflammatory comment trigger such a definitive collapse? The answer lies in a deeper, more profound cultural shift. The truth is, Jimmy Kimmel's grotesque attack on Charlie Kirk's memory was not merely perceived as a poorly judged joke or a lapse in taste. It became a powerful, resonant symbol of everything that millions of Americans found fundamentally objectionable about mainstream entertainment. Here was a financially privileged comedian, ensconced within the liberal bastion of Hollywood, shamelessly utilizing his influential platform to disseminate outright falsehoods about a tragic event. His purpose was transparent: to score cheap partisan political points against individuals who were experiencing genuine, profound grief. For countless viewers, this incident crystallized a sentiment that had been simmering for years. Late-night television had ceased to be about genuine entertainment and had transmuted into a weaponized instrument in broader cultural and political conflicts. The once clear boundaries delineating news, commentary, and comedy had completely dissolved, leaving audiences feeling less entertained and more relentlessly lectured every time they tuned in. What rendered Kimmel's situation uniquely damaging was the effortless ease with which his claims could be fact-checked and debunked. Within mere hours of his monologue airing, a torrent of police reports, official court documents, and meticulously verified information began circulating across social media platforms. These corrections originated not from partisan political sources, but from official law enforcement and judicial proceedings, completely contradicting every assertion Kimmel had made. This ushered in a phenomenon rarely witnessed in the traditional media era: a prominent late-night host being publicly and unequivocally proven factually incorrect on major claims, not by political adversaries, but by objective, legally substantiated evidence. The traditional television comedy model had long relied on the host's ability to dictate the narrative and swiftly pivot to the next topic before any meaningful challenge could coalesce. In today's hyper-connected, real-time information environment, that luxurious privilege no longer exists. Even more significantly, the backlash erupted from truly unexpected quarters. Social media personalities who typically did not align with conservative politics began to vocally condemn Kimmel's comments. Jeffree Star, a renowned makeup artist and influencer boasting millions of followers across various platforms, notably used his appearance on Piers Morgan's program to ardently defend Charlie Kirk and explicitly criticize the public celebration of his death. Here was an individual from an entirely different demographic and cultural milieu, taking a principled stand that, in a previous era, would have been considered politically perilous. While Starr reportedly lost approximately 100,000 followers for his outspoken stance, he simultaneously gained hundreds of thousands of new ones, who deeply appreciated his willingness to prioritize fundamental human decency over tribalistic political allegiances. This powerful pattern replicated itself across social media, with creators discovering a burgeoning audience hungry for voices, willing to reject the most extreme partisan talking points in favor of more thoughtful, nuanced perspectives. This burgeoning outrage ultimately flung open the doors to something far grander: a fundamental reversal of cultural power dynamics. What happened to Jimmy Kimmel signifies something far more profound than the mere downfall of a single comedian. For the first time in decades, we are witnessing the entertainment industry's long-held cultural monopoly being genuinely challenged in ways that generate concrete, material consequences for major media figures. Reflect on how a similar situation might have unfolded just a few years ago. The entertainment industry had developed intricate, sophisticated systems for weathering such storms. Legions of publicists meticulously managing narratives, an army of friendly entertainment reporters providing sympathetic coverage, and audiences who, due to limited alternatives, were largely compelled to consume whatever was presented. However, that entire self-protective ecosystem has been irrevocably disrupted. When Jimmy Kimmel launched his comments about Charlie Kirk, he was not merely facing criticism from traditional media outlets or conventional political opponents. He was confronted by immediate, sustained, and highly organized pushback from independent creators, burgeoning podcasters, and influential social media personalities. These alternative voices possessed the unparalleled ability to reach audiences directly, unmediated by traditional media gatekeepers. Crucially, these new voices could provide critical context and real-time, verifiable fact-checking, a capability utterly absent during the zenith of television's cultural dominance. Within hours, the public could access police reports, court documents, and verified information that directly and comprehensively contradicted Kimmel's fabricated narrative. The traditional advantage enjoyed by television hosts, the ability to make unsubstantiated claims and swiftly pivot to the next topic before facing meaningful scrutiny, had completely evaporated. This created a perfect storm, one for which the entrenched entertainment industry was woefully unprepared. Network executives found themselves navigating not merely a traditional political controversy, but a sustained, multi-front information campaign that systematically undermined their hosts' credibility in real time. Affiliate stations were inundated with calls from viewers who could cite specific, irrefutable evidence directly contradicting what they had just witnessed on their network programming. What made this particularly devastating for a figure like Kimmel was that his entire brand had been meticulously constructed upon an aura of being informed, morally authoritative, and inherently trustworthy. Late-night comedy had, over time, transmuted beyond simple entertainment. These hosts had strategically positioned themselves as trusted sources of political commentary and cultural guidance. When that painstakingly built credibility is utterly demolished by verifiable facts, the entire foundational appeal of the show collapses. This brings us to a fascinating historical parallel that, I believe, illuminates the true nature of what we are witnessing. There was a time when a select handful of major television networks held an almost monopolistic grip on the national conversation. 3 or 4 powerful executives based in New York and Los Angeles could unilaterally dictate the topics Americans would discuss around their dinner tables, determine which political figures would be taken seriously, and decide which cultural values would be promoted or, conversely, mercilessly ridiculed. That centralized system functioned effectively for decades precisely because alternatives were severely limited. If one desired entertainment or news, one was compelled to engage with these established gatekeepers. However, much like the Internet utterly disrupted traditional retail, or how electric vehicles are rapidly transforming the automotive industry, new technologies and diverse platforms have comprehensively shattered the old media monopoly. For decades, comedians such as David Letterman, Jay Leno, and later Jimmy Kimmel and Stephen Colbert possessed the unparalleled luxury of shaping public narratives with minimal pushback. Their monologues aired late at night. Most people heard about the content secondhand, if at all. And by the time any significant criticism might emerge, the hosts had already moved on to entirely different topics. It was a system inherently skewed to favor the host's perspective, whatever that perspective might be. But the meteoric rise of Donald Trump irrevocably altered this dynamic in ways that the entertainment industry still struggles to fully comprehend. When Trump began directly challenging media narratives on social media, responding to coverage in real time, and actively encouraging his millions of supporters to question traditional sources, he fundamentally broke the established rules governing public discourse. Suddenly, a late-night comedian could no longer make a claim about a political figure without that figure having the immediate capacity to respond directly to millions of followers within a matter of hours. The traditional buffer that had long shielded entertainment figures from direct political consequences simply evaporated. This transformation wasn't solely about Trump himself. It represented a broader, tectonic shift in how information disseminates throughout our society. The cascading repercussions of this shift have been profound, manifesting as a series of unprecedented changes across the entire media landscape. Changes that most in the entertainment industry are still desperately trying to process. Major news organizations that had operated with relative impunity for decades suddenly found themselves facing sustained scrutiny and unprecedented financial pressure. Public broadcasting giants like NPR and PBS, long considered immune due to their public funding and perceived prestige, saw their federal support dramatically curtailed or eliminated when their increasingly overt political bias became impossible to ignore. Stephen Colbert, who had meticulously constructed his entire late-night career around anti-Trump content, announced his retirement as his relevance began to wane in tandem with his target's decreased public prominence. Even prominent mainstream news personalities were compelled to acknowledge biases that had previously remained unexamined and unchallenged. The once impenetrable protective ecosystem that had shielded liberal media figures from meaningful accountability was simultaneously crumbling from multiple directions, and, crucially, as the legacy media titans weakened, new, agile players swiftly stepped in to claim the vacated throne. This is where the profound implications truly resonate, because nature abhors a vacuum, particularly in the relentlessly competitive world of entertainment. As traditional late-night shows hemorrhaged audiences and credibility, alternative voices experienced a period of explosive, unforeseen growth. Greg Gutfeld's show on Fox News emerged as the quintessential example of this dramatic shift. Here was a comedian, once relegated to afternoon cable programming just a few short years prior, suddenly commanding nightly audiences that dwarfed anything the major broadcast networks could generate. His unparalleled success was not accidental. He was providing a unique offering that millions of Americans had been yearning for, but could not find anywhere else. Gutfeld offered comedy that deliberately avoided incessantly lecturing his audience on their political beliefs or cultural values. He possessed the rare ability to poke fun at politicians from across the ideological spectrum without conveying the sense of reading from a predetermined partisan script. Most significantly, he cultivated an authentic rapport with his audience, appearing to genuinely like them rather than perceiving them as subjects to be educated, corrected, or condescended to. This fundamental difference in approach proved enormously significant in forging deep loyalty and trust among his viewers. However, the transformative changes extended far beyond the confines of traditional television. Independent creators operating on platforms such as YouTube and a burgeoning network of podcasts began to attract audiences that not only rivaled, but frequently surpassed anything the major networks could produce. These new wave creators possessed inherent advantages that traditional media simply could not match. the ability to respond to current events instantaneously, freedom from the anxieties of corporate sponsors regarding political content, and the profound capacity to cultivate direct, unmediated relationships with their audiences, unimpeded by network interference. What rendered this shift particularly devastating for someone like Jimmy Kimmel was that these alternative voices were not merely offering different political perspectives, they were frequently more genuinely entertaining, demonstrably more authentic, and far more directly responsive to the actual desires of their audiences. When one can consistently obtain funnier, more honest, and more insightful commentary from an individual operating out of a home studio than from a multi-million-dollar network production, the perceived advantages of legacy media begin to appear profoundly meaningless. Even more astonishing was the manner in which this cultural shift began to attract voices from entirely unexpected corners of the entertainment world. Jeffree Star, who meticulously forged his career in the realms of makeup and fashion, found himself unexpectedly transforming into a significant voice in political commentary. This transition occurred simply by his willingness to articulate the morally unambiguous stance that celebrating political assassinations was fundamentally wrong, irrespective of the victim's political affiliations. Star's compelling appearance on Piers Morgan's show, where he forthrightly defended Charlie Kirk and condemned the unconscionable celebration of his death, powerfully demonstrated a crucial evolution in the cultural landscape. Here was an individual with millions of followers across diverse platforms, predominantly young people who traditionally would not engage with conservative political content, boldly speaking out against the mainstream entertainment industry's tone-deaf response to a national tragedy. The remarkable fact that Starr experienced a temporary loss of followers but simultaneously gained even more new ones for taking that principled stand reveals a pivotal truth about the current trajectory of American culture. There is a palpable, pervasive hunger for voices willing to prioritize fundamental human decency over entrenched political tribalism, even when such a stance necessitates challenging the established narratives of their own industries or communities. This pattern has replicated itself across social media and various entertainment platforms. Creators willing to deviate from expected political positions, particularly when defending basic principles of fairness, accuracy, or human respect, often found themselves connecting with entirely new, receptive audiences they had never anticipated reaching. The rigid ideological categories that had artificially defined entertainment and politics for decades were rapidly dissolving, giving way to more nuanced, human-centered approaches. Which brings us full circle, back to Kimmel. His downfall is not merely the isolated story of one man's career ending. It is a potent symbol of a profound cultural era. Drawing to a close, the painful, gradual lesson that Hollywood is now being forced to confront is that the era of consequence-free political grandstanding by entertainment figures is definitively over. For years, these figures could confidently make outrageous statements, disseminate questionable or outright false information, or mock vast segments of the American public with minimal discernible risk to their careers or financial bottom lines. The industry had meticulously developed sophisticated self-protective mechanisms to shield its own, especially when controversial pronouncements conveniently aligned with the prevailing political winds. However, what transpired with Jimmy Kimmel represents nothing less than the systemic collapse of that protective apparatus. When an individual's public statements become so inflammatory that they directly threaten vital business relationships, when independent fact-checkers can instantly contradict claims with verifiable, irrefutable evidence, and when audiences possess an unprecedented array of readily available alternatives that more effectively cater to their needs and preferences, suddenly the old, established rules become obsolete. This shift transcends the simplistic dichotomy of conservative versus liberal politics. What audiences are overwhelmingly rejecting is the implicit assumption that they should passively tolerate being lectured, deliberately misled, or openly insulted by individuals whose primary role is ostensibly to entertain them. The unwritten social contract between entertainers and their audiences has undergone a fundamental, irreversible transformation. It is no longer sufficient to merely appear on television or command a major platform. One must actively earn and meticulously maintain an audience's trust and unwavering loyalty. Disney's decisive action to sever ties with Kimmel, notwithstanding years of tacitly endorsing his political commentary, powerfully illustrates the rapidity with which these corporate calculations can shift. When fundamental business realities change, entertainment companies are, at their core, businesses. And when a performer or a program transmutes from an asset into a significant liability, even long-standing relationships and previously aligned ideological positions become secondary, dispensable considerations. The broader, far-reaching lesson extends well beyond the confines of late-night comedy. Across the vast landscape of Hollywood, performers, writers, and executives are being compelled to fundamentally reconsider assumptions that had guided their careers for decades. The once comforting notion that there existed a safe political position, immune from controversy, has largely evaporated. Instead, contemporary success increasingly hinges upon authenticity, verifiable accuracy, and a genuine, profound respect for the audience, qualities that the old, entrenched system often actively discouraged in favor of ideological conformity. And this leads us to the true, underlying reason behind Kimmel's cancellation, a reason that should serve as a stark warning to every entertainer and media professional. While the political controversy undoubtedly provided the immediate, precipitating catalyst for Kimmel's downfall, the deeper, more uncomfortable truth is that he had already become a significant liability from a purely business-centric perspective. The brutal reality of the entertainment industry dictates that talent, political leanings, and even controversy itself can all be forgiven, provided one continues to generate substantial profits. However, the moment profitability ceases and problems begin to proliferate, even the most powerful networks will, with ruthless efficiency, eventually cut their losses. Kimmel's ratings had been in a steady, discernible decline for years preceding the eruption of the Charlie Kirk controversy. His audience was inexorably aging, his overall reach was diminishing, and the per-viewer cost of his show was becoming increasingly difficult to justify to corporate executives who bear ultimate responsibility to shareholders and board members. The show was, in essence, operating on residual institutional momentum rather than genuine market demand. When the controversy finally struck, It presented Disney executives with precisely what they had been quietly seeking for months: a clean, justifiable exit strategy that allowed them to avoid the uncomfortable optics of simply canceling a flagship program for poor performance. They could deftly frame the decision as a principled stand concerning public responsibility and broadcast standards, rather than explicitly acknowledging that one of their most prominent programs had simply become financially unsustainable. This dynamic powerfully explains why the industry response was so swift, so decisive, and so impactful. In a bygone era, networks might have stoically weathered even significant controversy to protect a highly profitable show. But when a show is already struggling financially, controversy ceases to be a challenge to overcome, and instead becomes the ultimate crushing final straw. The profound lesson here is not primarily about the nebulous concept of cancel culture or perceived political correctness. It is, fundamentally, about the uncompromising economics of entertainment in a rapidly shifting media landscape. Audiences now possess an unprecedented multiplicity of choices, and they are increasingly willing to exercise their power by voting with their attention and their wallets when content fails to meet their heightened expectations. For entertainers who meticulously constructed their careers around the old paradigm of protected controversy, this represents an existential, career-defining challenge. The once reliable assumption that networks or streaming platforms would act as an impregnable shield against consequences is no longer viable, particularly when those very platforms are confronting their own fierce survival pressures in an increasingly competitive marketplace. Jimmy Kimmel's abrupt fall signals not merely a cultural shift away from traditional late-night comedy, but the broader financial collapse of a business model that, for generations, once seemed utterly untouchable. When major broadcast networks demonstrate a willingness to abandon expensive productions and sever long-established relationships over single controversial incidents, it unequivocally illustrates just how precarious the entertainment industry's economics have truly become. So, what are the overarching takeaways from this dramatic saga? It transcends Kimmel's individual trajectory. It illuminates a monumental cultural shift unfolding right now. What we are witnessing with Jimmy Kimmel's effective cancellation is, in essence, a profound case study in the rapid erosion of relevance that can afflict established institutions when they cease to genuinely serve their audiences. For those of us who have lived through numerous technological and cultural shifts, this pattern holds a familiar resonance. It mirrors the exact same dynamic we have observed playing out, with relentless predictability, across industry after industry over the past several decades. The entertainment world operated for generations under a set of ingrained assumptions: that audiences had inherently limited alternatives, that controversial political statements emanating from the left carried minimal inherent risk, and that well-established media companies possessed the institutional fortitude and industry connections to weather virtually any storm. Every single one of those foundational assumptions has been definitively proven false in today's dynamic environment. What is now rapidly emerging in their place is a media landscape far more directly responsive to genuine audience preferences and demonstrably less tolerant of poor performance, irrespective of political alignment. This isn't merely a binary struggle between conservative and liberal politics. It is fundamentally about competence, authenticity, and a profound fundamental respect for the individuals who consciously choose to invest their precious time and attention in your content. The astonishing speed with which Jimmy Kimmel transitioned from a seemingly protected late-night institution to a demonstrable industry liability vividly illustrates how swiftly these transformative changes can accelerate once they reach a critical tipping point. Network executives, who had previously been content to disregard declining ratings and burgeoning audience dissatisfaction, suddenly found themselves confronted with a perfect storm. Simultaneous regulatory pressure, open rebellion from crucial affiliate stations, and profound nervousness from indispensable sponsors. But perhaps most crucially, they discovered that their traditional, long-honed tools for managing controversy, issuing bland corporate statements, deploying highly paid publicists for damage control, and relying on friendly entertainment reporters for sympathetic coverage, were rendered largely ineffectual against a sustained, organic barrage of criticism from independent voices. These new voices possessed the unprecedented ability to directly reach vast audiences and provide immediate, unvarnished fact-checking and critical context. This represents nothing less than a fundamental, irreversible shift in the very architecture of cultural power in America. For the first time in decades, establishment media institutions are demonstrably vulnerable to genuine grassroots accountability, in ways that now generate very real, tangible consequences for even their most prominent figures. The once impenetrable protective barriers that had historically shielded entertainment elites from the direct repercussions of their statements and decisions have largely crumbled into dust. What this profound transformation signifies for all of us, particularly for those who recall a time when media institutions commanded a far greater degree of automatic respect and deference, is that we are entering a new, vibrant period of genuine competition within the vast marketplace of ideas and entertainment. No longer can a select handful of executives operating from New York and Los Angeles unilaterally dictate what the rest of the country will find genuinely funny, inherently interesting, or truly worthy of their precious attention. The emerging landscape unequivocally rewards authenticity, verifiable accuracy, and genuine, heartfelt connection with audiences, prioritizing these qualities over rigid ideological conformity or outdated institutional support. It is undeniably a messier, far more unpredictable system than the old centralized model, but it is also inherently more responsive to what people actually desire, rather than what industry elites believe they should desire. For viewers, this seismic shift presents both unprecedented opportunities and heightened responsibilities. We now possess unparalleled access to a vastly more diverse array of voices and perspectives than ever before. However, this also mandates that we become far more discerning consumers of information and entertainment. The old gatekeepers are, to a large extent, gone, which intrinsically means that each of us must cultivate a greater proficiency in evaluating sources critically and engaging in independent thought about the content we consume. The Jimmy Kimmel situation ultimately serves as a stark embodiment of the inevitable growing pains inherent in this monumental transition. An entertainer who meticulously built his career under a now obsolete set of rules painfully discovered that those rules no longer applied. Concurrently, The very industry that had once afforded him unwavering protection found that such protection was no longer economically viable. What definitively emerged from that collision was a clearer, more unvarnished picture of how entertainment and media will operate in the years ahead. Fundamentally more competitive, unequivocally more accountable, and dramatically more directly responsive to the authentic preferences of their audiences. And now, I'd genuinely love to hear your thoughts on this pivotal moment. Was this cancellation, in your opinion, long overdue? Do you believe late-night comedy irrevocably lost its way years ago, morphing into political messaging rather than genuine entertainment? Have you found yourself consciously turning away from traditional television in favor of diverse alternative sources for news and comedic content? These profound changes impact every single one of us, irrespective of our political beliefs, because at their core, they interrogate whether we desire our entertainment and information sources to truly respect us as intelligent, discerning adults, or to condescendingly treat us as individuals who require constant management and ideological direction. Please share your insights and perspectives down in the comments section below. And if this comprehensive breakdown helped you to truly understand the deeper dynamics at play behind these headline-grabbing stories, please don't hesitate to like this video, subscribe to the channel for more in-depth analysis, and share it widely with your friends. Because the more people who grasp these fundamental underlying dynamics, the exponentially harder it becomes for powerful media giants to obfuscate the real truths behind the decisions they make. The future, undeniably, belongs to voices that authentically earn trust, rather than arrogantly demand it, and to audiences that actively think for themselves, rather than passively accepting what they are told. Jimmy Kimmel's downfall is not the conclusion of a story. It is, in fact, the dramatic prelude to something far more interesting and transformative.